My name's Catherine, I'm 32, and I won millions in the lottery, but I never told a soul. Instead, I asked my own family for help, and what they did to me still makes my chest ache. This isn't just about money, it's about trust, love, and what happens when both disappear. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about family, betrayal, and emotional courage. I never expected that night to mean anything. It was a Tuesday, one of those dull, endless evenings where I'd just gotten home from a late shift at the grocery store. My back ached from standing too long, and my hands smelled faintly of produce and cardboard. I remember throwing my purse on the couch and emptying my pockets the way I always did: receipts, loose change, and that one stray lottery ticket I'd bought half on impulse, half out of habit. People in line at the gas station were buzzing about it, chatting like dreamers do. Someone ahead of me joked, "Maybe this'll be the one that gets me outta here." I smiled politely, handed over a crumpled $5, and stuffed the ticket in my coat pocket, already forgetting about it. To me, it was just another silly piece of paper, no different from a receipt I'd never need. The following week, I was folding laundry when the TV hummed in the background. The numbers rolled across the screen, one after another. I glanced up, not paying much attention until the third number matched. I froze, socks clutched in my hands. Fourth number, match. Fifth. Sixth. My heart hammered so loudly I thought I'd collapse right there on the faded rug in my living room. I checked again. And again. My hands shook so violently the laundry basket toppled over, spilling shirts onto the floor. There it was in black and white. I was holding a ticket worth millions. For a full minute, I just stared at it, waiting for some wave of joy, relief, or wild excitement to crash over me. But it didn't come. Instead, the first thought that crept into my head wasn't "I'm free," but "who do I even tell?" You'd think a person would scream or dance. I didn't. I just sat on the floor, numb, as the washer buzzed in the background. That tiny piece of paper could change everything: rent, bills, the endless cycle of scraping by. Yet the silence in the room reminded me how alone I felt. I thought of my family. My mom. My brother. My sister. Over the years, I had asked them for help, not grand gestures, just rides when my car broke down, a little money for groceries when hours at work got cut. More often than not, I got excuses, eye rolls, or awkward silences. My brother would say, "You gotta toughen up, Kat. Life's hard for everyone." My sister would laugh it off, "You're too dramatic." That night, staring at the winning ticket, a bitter thought crossed my mind. If I told them now, would they even care about me, or just the money? I placed the ticket in an old coffee can on the top shelf of my pantry, tucked between flour and sugar. Strange hiding spot, but it felt safe. The next morning, I still got up, pulled on my work shirt, and headed to the store. Nobody knew. Not a single person. Days passed, and reality set in. Technically, I could quit my job that very second. I could pay off every debt. I could walk into a dealership and drive away in something brand new instead of coaxing my old rusted sedan to start every morning. But I didn't. I showed up to work. I clocked in. I bagged groceries for people who looked straight through me, the same way my family often did. Part of me wondered why I was still living that way, pretending nothing had changed. But another part knew the truth: I wasn't ready to see what money would reveal about the people around me. One evening, while sitting at the kitchen table with my mom, I tried to test the waters. "Hey, Mom," I said softly, "do you ever think about what we'd do if one of us came into money? Like, a lot of money?" She chuckled without looking up from her phone. "Honey, people like us don't win things like that. You just keep working hard. That's the only way out." Her words stung more than they should have. She didn't even glance at me. I wanted to blurt out, "I already did. I won." But I bit my tongue. If she couldn't imagine me as lucky, how could she accept me as wealthy? That week, I started noticing little things. At work, my manager snapped at me for being 5 minutes late, and I didn't even care. I knew I could walk out at any moment, but I didn't. I wanted to see how long I could stand invisible in a world where, secretly, I could afford so much more. Then, one Saturday morning, my car wouldn't start. Again. I called my brother, hoping maybe, just maybe, he'd come through. He sighed loudly over the phone, said he was too busy, and told me to call a cab. When I mentioned I was broke until payday, he laughed. Kat, you gotta learn to manage your money better. I hung up, staring at my cracked driveway. The irony burned inside me. I had millions sitting in a bank account waiting for me once I claimed it. Yet, in that moment, I couldn't even count on my own brother for a $20 ride. Later that evening, my sister called not to check on me, but to ask if I could babysit her kids while she and her husband went out. I agreed, because that's what I always did. I showed up, cooked dinner, played board games, and tucked them in while she got to escape for the night. When she returned, she barely thanked me. She just waved, slipped me a $5 bill, and said, "Don't spend it all in one place." I smiled politely, but inside, something twisted. I realized then that money wouldn't magically make them see me differently. If I told them, they'd only see dollar signs. Not Catherine. Not the sister, the daughter, the woman who had spent years holding everything together. By the end of that week, the truth settled deep into my chest. The ticket had changed my bank balance, but it hadn't changed me. And it certainly hadn't changed the way my family treated me. So, I made a choice. I would tell no one. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I'd watch. I'd test. I'd see, once and for all, whether their kindness was real or only ever conditional. And in that silence, holding a secret worth millions, I realized the cruelest truth of all: winning didn't make me less invisible. It just made me invisible with money. Invisible with money, that thought echoed inside me for days. I carried it like a secret weight as I moved through the familiar rhythm of home life. My family didn't know, and nothing in their behavior suggested they ever would. One evening, we all sat down for dinner at my mom's house. The kitchen smelled like baked chicken and mashed potatoes, comfort food that should have felt warm and welcoming. My brother dominated the conversation, bragging about a promotion he'd gotten at work. My mom beamed with pride, hanging on every word. My sister chimed in here and there, tossing in stories about her kids, how her youngest had won a spelling bee at school. Laughter filled the room, laughter that didn't include me. I tried to speak once, mentioning how exhausting my shifts had been at the store lately, but my words were brushed aside, drowned in the noise of their excitement. No one looked up. No one asked a follow-up question. I sat there chewing in silence, the clink of my fork against the plate louder than any acknowledgement from them. It was as though the walls themselves were better listeners than my family. Later that night, while washing dishes, I overheard my sister whispering to my mom in the living room. "Kat just doesn't push herself, you know? She's always stuck." Her words weren't meant for me, but they landed like stones in my chest. I paused, dish in hand, staring at the soapy water swirling around the sink. I wanted to shout, "I'm not stuck, I'm surviving. I've been carrying more than you'll ever know." But instead, I stayed quiet, letting the suds bubble over my knuckles, listening to them dismiss me like I wasn't even there. The next morning, I offered to drive my mom to her doctor's appointment since her car was in the shop. She thanked me quickly, but when she got in the car, she spent the whole ride on her phone, barely acknowledging me. At one point, she chuckled at a message and said, "Your brother is so good to me. Always checking in." The word stung, not because my brother cared, but because she hadn't noticed I was right there driving her, showing up in the quiet ways no one seemed to value. That night, lying awake, I thought back to childhood dinners. I'd always been the quieter one, the helper, the one clearing plates while my siblings filled the room with stories. Back then, I told myself my time would come, that one day, they'd see me. But here I was, decades later, still waiting for ears that never listened. A few days later, another moment carved itself into my memory. My sister invited me over to watch her kids while she ran errands. I didn't mind, I loved her children. They were lively, full of questions, and unlike the adults in my family, they actually listened when I spoke. We colored at the kitchen table, trading silly jokes and laughing. For a while, I forgot the bitterness that had been growing inside me. When my sister returned, she barely glanced at the drawings I proudly taped to the fridge with her kids. Instead, she handed me $10, like I was some teenage babysitter instead of her 32-year-old sister. "Thanks, Kat." "You're a lifesaver," she said with a tired smile before rushing off to put away groceries. The kids had hugged me tighter than she did. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding that crumpled $10 bill. Millions hidden away, yet in my family's eyes, my worth seemed stuck at pocket change. I wanted to believe it wasn't intentional, that maybe they just didn't see how much it hurt. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized invisibility wasn't an accident, it was a pattern. One Sunday afternoon, we gathered again, this time for a family barbecue. The yard smelled of charcoal and burgers sizzling on the grill. Neighbors wandered over, greeting my mom, shaking hands with my brother, complimenting my sister's kids. I stood there holding a plate of potato salad, smiling politely, waiting for anyone to pull me into a conversation. But people's eyes slid past me like I was background furniture. When I finally did speak, mentioning that I'd been thinking about taking a community college class to learn bookkeeping, my brother smirked. "Kat, do you really think school's your thing? Not trying to be mean, but you've never exactly been academic." He laughed, and others chuckled softly, like it was all harmless fun. My cheeks burned, but I forced a smile, setting my plate down before slipping inside the house. In the quiet of the kitchen, I pressed my palms against the counter, trying to steady my breath. Their voices floated in from outside, still buzzing, still full of life that didn't need me. I realized then that the louder they became, the smaller I felt. And no amount of money tucked away could change that. That evening, when I returned home, I sank into my couch, the silence heavy around me. I thought about all the little moments, the ignored comments, the side whispers, the laughter that excluded me. It wasn't just the big dismissals, it was the accumulation of tiny cuts that had left scars no one else could see. I pulled out the ticket from the coffee can, staring at the faded numbers again. Proof that I wasn't small. Proof that I mattered, at least in the world outside my family's walls. But in this house, in their eyes, I was still invisible. And as the days went on, I began to realize something important. Invisibility doesn't happen in a single moment. It builds slowly, brick by brick, until you're walled off completely, watching your own family laugh on the other side. That night, I sat alone in my dim living room, the glow of the streetlight spilling through the blinds. The walls around me felt heavier than ever, like they were pressing in, trapping my silence. I had spent years hoping for my family's approval, waiting for moments that never came. But something inside me shifted. I no longer wanted their praise. I wanted the truth. So, I decided to test them. Not in some grand scheme, but in small, ordinary ways. Favors. Little requests. Things any family should do for one another without hesitation. If love was real, it would show in the simplest acts. If it wasn't, then maybe I was better off knowing. The first test came sooner than I expected. My old sedan coughed and sputtered in the grocery store parking lot, refusing to start. I sat there gripping the wheel, listening to the hollow click of the ignition. My hands shook, not from fear of being stranded, but from the opportunity it gave me. I pulled out my phone and called my brother. "Hey, Mark. My car won't start. Could you swing by and give me a jump?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, the kind of sigh that made it clear I was an inconvenience. "Kat, I just sat down with dinner. Can't you call AAA or something?" "I don't have it," I admitted softly. Another pause. "You really should plan better. Look, I'll see if I can come tomorrow. For now, maybe just take a bus." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there in the cold, my breath fogging up the windshield, the parking lot lights buzzing above me. My chest ached. I wasn't asking for money, just a jump start. Something quick. Something any brother could do. But to him, I was an afterthought. I ended up calling a coworker, someone I barely knew outside of the store. She drove across town and helped without a second thought. Her kindness stung not because it wasn't welcome, but because it came from a stranger, not blood. The second test happened later that week. I stopped by my sister's house on a Saturday morning. She was folding laundry while her kids played video games in the living room. "Hey, do you think I could borrow $20 until payday?" I asked gently. She looked up, eyebrows raised. "20? What for?" Groceries. Just a few things to get me through, I said. She chuckled, shaking her head. Kat, you really need to budget better. I mean, it's $20, but still. You can't keep living like this. Her words weren't cruel, but they carried judgment. She pulled out her wallet and slowly peeled off a bill, handing it to me with a sigh. Don't make this a habit. I thanked her quietly, slipping it into my pocket. But inside, I felt smaller than ever. It wasn't the money, it was the way she made me feel like a burden for something so small. That night, I cooked pasta with the groceries I'd bought. As I ate alone, I thought about how easy it had been for her to make me feel ashamed. She had no idea I could buy out her pantry 10 times over. And yet, she acted like she was doing me a grand favor. A week later, I tried again, this time with my mom. She'd been complaining about a leaky faucet in her kitchen. I decided to turn the test around. Mom, I could really use some help fixing a shelf in my apartment, I told her one afternoon, while sitting at her table. She didn't even look up from her crossword puzzle. Honey, you know I'm not handy with that stuff. Ask Mark. I pressed gently. Even just holding it steady while I drill? It wouldn't take long. She shook her head. I'm too tired. Besides, you always figure these things out. The conversation ended there. She went back to her puzzle, and I sat staring at the wood grain of her table, realizing she hadn't even considered it. My mom, the woman who used to bandage my scraped knees, now couldn't be bothered to hold a shelf for me. The fourth test was almost unintentional. I called Mark again, this time on a snowy morning. The streets were icy, and my car was buried under a heavy layer of frost. Could you give me a ride to work? Just this once? I asked. He groaned. Seriously? I've got my own stuff to do. Why don't you call an Uber? I can't afford that right now, I lied, my voice low. Well, that's not my problem. You're an adult, Kat. Figure it out. I hung up without another word. My hands trembled as I shoved them into my pockets, trudging down the icy sidewalk to catch the bus. The cold bit into my cheeks, but the sting in my chest burned hotter. The fifth test was the hardest. I asked my sister if she could watch my apartment cat, Molly, while I worked a double shift. Molly's pretty easy, I explained. Just food and water. Maybe a little playtime. She frowned. Kat, I've got enough on my plate with the kids. I don't need to take care of your pet too. She's just a cat, I said, almost pleading. Exactly. You'll figure it out. She closed the subject with a dismissive wave. That evening, as I stroked Molly's soft fur, her purr vibrating against my palm, I realized the cruel irony. My cat, a creature I'd chosen, offered me more comfort than the family I was born into. By the time the week ended, I had my answer. Each test revealed the same truth. Their kindness had limits, and I always fell outside of them. It wasn't about the car, or the groceries, or the shelf. It was about effort. About whether they would step out of their comfort zone for me the way I'd done for them countless times. I thought back to all the nights I'd babysat for free, all the errands I'd run without complaint, all the rides I'd given even when my gas tank was nearly empty. I'd done it out of love, not because I expected something in return. But when it was my turn, the love didn't circle back. One evening, I sat in my living room, staring at the silent walls once again. Molly curled beside me, her steady breathing filling the silence. I thought about my tests, not as petty experiments, but as windows into truth. My family had shown me who they were. And while it broke my heart, it also freed me. Because when someone shows you they can't be bothered to see you, to hear you, to help you, you stop waiting for them to change. And as I held that truth, I realized something deeper. The tests weren't really for them. They were for me. To prove once and for all that my invisibility wasn't just in my head. Now, I knew. The night it happened, the air in my sister's dining room was thick with the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread. Her table was set with mismatched plates, kids' cups beside wine glasses, a blend of chaos and comfort that should have felt like home. It didn't. I sat at the far end, fork in hand, pushing food around my plate. My mom chatted with my brother about his latest promotion, her voice bright and proud. My sister laughed about a trip she wanted to take with her husband. Their voices filled the room, weaving around me, never touching me. No one asked about my week. No one looked my way. I felt the weight of Molly's absence, my little cat waiting at home for me. She would have greeted me, nudged her head against my palm, made me feel seen. But here, in a room full of family, I may as well have been invisible. I swallowed a lump in my throat and decided to speak. I got a new schedule at work, I said quietly, testing the waters. Mark didn't even look up. Cool. My sister reached for the bread basket. Pass the butter. The conversation rolled on, unbothered, unbroken. My words had landed like a pebble in a storm, too small to notice. Something in me cracked. Halfway through dinner, the kids started bickering over who got the last piece of garlic bread. My sister snapped, her voice sharp, then turned back to her husband, laughing seconds later as if nothing had happened. Everyone carried on, but I sat there, a knot tightening in my stomach. I wasn't sure if it was anger or grief. Maybe both. When my mom raised her glass to toast Mark's promotion, pride brimming in her eyes, my fork clattered against my plate. The sound was louder than I expected, enough to pull their attention for the first time all evening. "Cat?" my sister asked. I forced a shaky smile. "Sorry. Just slipped." But inside, my chest was pounding. Years of being overlooked, years of giving more than I got, years of swallowing hurt, it was all boiling, threatening to spill over. It didn't take much to push me the rest of the way. Mark leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Cat, you should really think about going back to school or something. I mean, working at that store can't be your forever, right?" The words landed like a slap. He said it casually, like advice, but I heard the judgment underneath. The dismissal. The reminder that in their eyes, I was still the one who hadn't figured life out. My sister chuckled, adding, "Yeah, Cat. You're smart. You just don't use it." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it was enough. Enough to split me wide open. I dropped my fork. It clanged against the plate, sharp in the silence that followed. My voice trembled when I spoke, but it carried more weight than it ever had before. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I asked. Their smiles faltered. "You sit here, week after week, talking about yourselves, your jobs, your trips, your kids. Do you realize you've never once asked me how I'm doing?" "Not really. Not once." Mark frowned. "Come on, Cat. That's not fair." "Not fair." My voice rose, surprising even me. What's not fair is giving and never being seen. Not when I need a ride. Not when I need a hand. Not even when I'm sitting right in front of you. The kids stared wide-eyed. My sister's husband cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. My mom put down her glass. "Catherine," she said softly, "this isn't the time." "When is the time, Mom?" "When I'm older. When I finally collapse from carrying everything alone. Because I've been waiting for years, and it never comes." My chest heaved, words tumbling out like a dam had burst. I hadn't planned this, hadn't wanted to cause a scene. But it was too late. The breaking point had found me. Silence stretched. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd finally hear me. Maybe my pain would echo in the quiet and make them see. But Mark only sighed, shaking his head. "You're being dramatic." The words cut deeper than anything before. "Dramatic?" I whispered. He shrugged. "You always think the world's against you. Maybe if you stopped playing the victim, things would be different." My vision blurred. Heat rushed to my cheeks. Every word I wanted to say tangled in my throat, burning. My sister reached for her glass, avoiding my eyes. "Let's not ruin dinner," she muttered. That was it. That was their answer. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Molly's face flashed in my mind, her steady purr, her unconditional presence. My eyes stung, but I refused to let them see me cry. "You know what?" My voice shook, but I forced it steady. "Dinner is already ruined." I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, ignoring their startled expressions. My mom started to speak, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "Don't bother," I said quietly. And then I walked out. The cold night air hit me like a slap, sharp and clean. My breath fogged in the darkness as I stumbled to my car, fumbling with the keys. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. When I finally slid into the driver's seat, the silence hit me harder than their words had. My chest heaved, sobs breaking free before I could stop them. For years I had swallowed the hurt, convinced myself it was better to keep the peace. But now, it was all out in the open. And nothing had changed. That was the cruelest part. They hadn't heard me. Not really. They never would. I sat there for what felt like hours, headlights streaking past on the road, the world moving while I stayed frozen. My phone buzzed once, my sister's name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer. A text followed. You overreacted. Call me when you've calmed down. Overreacted. I let out a hollow laugh, wiping my face. The irony was bitter. 4 years, I had underreacted, biting my tongue, pretending I wasn't drowning. And the one time I finally broke, they reduced it to an overreaction. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. When I finally drove home, the roads were slick with frost. Streetlights blurred through my tears, painting golden streaks across the windshield. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, every muscle in my body tense. Molly was waiting at the door when I arrived, her tail flicking, her eyes wide with recognition. She wound herself around my legs as I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in her fur. Her steady purr filled the silence, warm and real. Unlike the voices that had drowned me out, hers never failed. For the first time in years, I let myself break completely. And strangely, in that breaking, I felt something else too, something small, but steady. The beginning of freedom. Molly purred against my chest, her warmth seeping into my skin as if she was stitching me back together one fragile thread at a time. The night outside my window was still and cold, but in that quiet, I made a choice. I wasn't going back. Not to their dinners. Not to their dismissive laughter. Not to their hollow promises of next time. I had given them years of chances, and they had given me silence in return. From now on, the silence would be mine, chosen, controlled, and kept. And with the secret tucked away in my bank account, I could finally decide what my life would look like. The first change was small. I called off work the next morning. My manager sighed, annoyed, but I didn't care. For once, I let myself rest without guilt. I made a pot of coffee, the rich smell filling my tiny kitchen, and sat at the table with Molly curled in the chair beside me. I pulled out a notepad and wrote 2 words at the top of the page, my life. The words looked strange, almost foreign. For so long, everything I did had been filtered through what others needed. Now, it was just me. I wrote down dreams I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud. A small house of my own. A garden. A trip to the coast to watch the ocean. Maybe even taking classes, not for a degree, not for them, but just because I wanted to. It felt like breathing for the first time. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't go buy a mansion or a shiny car. That wasn't me. My changes were quiet, almost invisible to anyone watching. I found a modest cottage on the edge of town, with white shutters and a wraparound porch. The realtor's eyebrows lifted when I paid in cash, but she didn't ask questions. I moved in with only Molly and a few boxes, leaving behind the cramped apartment that had always felt like a temporary stop. Here, everything was mine. The chipped paint on the window frames, the uneven wooden floors, the smell of pine trees drifting in through the back door, it was imperfect, and it was perfect. The first night, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around me, listening to the crickets. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a call, or an invitation, or a scrap of attention. The silence was mine. Of course, my family noticed my absence. A week after the dinner, my sister texted, "Are you coming Sunday?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "No. Not anymore." Her reply came fast. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. A call from my mom followed, her voice tight with annoyance. "Catherine, your sister said you're upset. Don't hold grudges. Family is family." I almost laughed. A lifetime of being unseen, and it boiled down to me holding a grudge. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "I just need space." She sighed, frustrated. You'll regret shutting people out. Maybe I would. But I knew I'd regret staying more. My days slowly reshaped themselves. I planted herbs in pots on the windowsill. I walked through farmers' markets, buying fresh bread and flowers, carrying them home with a smile I didn't realize I still had in me. I took Molly to the vet for the first thorough checkup I could afford, and the relief of knowing she was healthy lifted a weight I hadn't noticed on my shoulders. I started volunteering at the library on Saturdays, helping kids pick out books. Their bright eyes and endless questions filled a space inside me that my family's silence never could. No one there knew about the lottery. No one looked at me with expectation or envy. I was just Catherine, the woman who recommended mysteries to the teenagers and picture books to the toddlers. It was simple. It was mine. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered what they would say if they knew. Would Mark still call me dramatic if he found out I could buy his house twice over? Would my sister still laugh about me not using my brain if she saw the bank statement with more zeros than she'd ever seen? Would my mom still sigh about me being ungrateful if she knew I had chosen not to share, not out of spite, but out of survival? The questions lingered like ghosts. But the answers didn't matter. Because they would never know. That was the real power in my silence. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Mark at the grocery store. He looked surprised to see me, his cart filled with frozen dinners and soda. "Kat," he said, smiling too brightly. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Yeah," I replied evenly, tossing a bag of flour into my cart. He shifted, glancing around as if worried someone else might hear. "Listen, I could use a little help. Things have been tight since the promotion didn't work out." For a second, I almost told him. I almost let slip that I could write him a check big enough to solve his problems. But then I remembered the way he'd called me dramatic, the way he'd laughed at my job. "I can't," I said simply. His smile faltered. "Really? Even just a little?" I shook my head, pushing my cart forward. "Sorry, Mark. I have my own life to handle." The look on his face followed me out the door, but I didn't regret it. For once, I had chosen myself. My sister tried again a few weeks later, showing up at my cottage unannounced. I saw her car from the window and almost didn't open the door. But Molly was meowing loudly, and I didn't want her to hear. "Kat," she said, forcing a smile. "Wow. Nice place." "Thanks," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes roaming over the cozy living room, the books stacked on the shelves, the new rug on the floor. "You've been busy," she said. "Looks like things are good for you." "They are." There was a pause. She shifted awkwardly. "Look, about that dinner. We didn't mean to hurt you. You know how it gets. Everyone talking over each other." I crossed my arms. "It wasn't just that dinner. It's been years." Her smile wavered. "You're making too big a deal out of it." The same old words. The same dismissal. "I think you should go," I said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Kat, don't be like that." I said go. This time, I didn't waver. When the door shut behind her, I felt lighter. Seasons shifted. My garden bloomed in spring, the air thick with lilac. In summer, I drove to the coast and stood barefoot in the sand, the roar of the ocean filling my ears. In autumn, I stacked firewood on the porch, watching the leaves turn gold and red. Winter brought snow, soft and quiet, blanketing the world in stillness. Through it all, I lived. Not for them. Not for approval. Just for me. And every time I curled up with Molly by the fire, or flipped the sign to open at the small bookstore I eventually bought downtown, I thought of them. Not with bitterness anymore, but with a strange kind of clarity. They would never know. They would never see the life I built, the peace I found, the love I gave myself. And maybe that was the best ending I could have asked for. Sometimes, in the quiet, I whispered it out loud, just to feel the truth of it on my tongue. They'll never know. And in that silence, I finally felt whole.